We all have those particular franchises that we adore, making sure never to miss each and every iteration as they're released. For some, it's a particular series of movies, for others, a book collection. For many of us, it's in the form of a video game franchise. We are lucky in the gaming community, there are an incredible number of franchises to choose from, with some excellent entries in each series. There are a number of examples that come to mind: Call of Duty, the Battlefield series and Halo, to name but a few. My chosen series is Assassin's Creed, arguably the most varied video game franchise both in setting and in gameplay. It's with this franchise I'd like to introduce my new show, Playing by Series, where I choose a video game series and play what I believe to be the most important games in the series, discovering as I go how the franchise changed over its course. And where better to start than my favourite? Now, before I even begin, I'm sure you're already questioning my method. Why start with Assassin's Creed 2? An understandable question, but one I believe simple enough to answer, with a quick 70-word review of the first game. Assassin's Creed is okay. Its graphics are unremarkable, and its world slightly bland. It shines in its story with engaging characters and a nicely interwoven plot with intrigue and interest. While it managed an excellent job of introducing the world to what we would all associate with the standard Assassin's Creed gameplay, its clunky controls and uninspired sepia tone easily make it perhaps the most bland entry in the series. Assassin's Creed 2 is the game that got me hooked on Assassin's Creed, and it was also the first entry into the series that I played. Since then, I have played every single Assassin's Creed game in each console generation, and I still love them. So I thought it would be interesting to look at how my expectations match up to the product at hand. Do I view my experiences with some of these games through rose-tinted glasses, or do they still match up to modern games? Or do the games that I thought were the lower points in the series actually turn out to be far better than I ever thought? Without further ado, let's get started with the first game in the Assassin's Creed series that I laid my hands on. At its time of release, Assassin's Creed 2 was a massive step up graphically from the first game. Instead of joining with the rest of the gaming industry's interest in increasingly applying various sepia-toned masks to video games, Ubisoft created a colourful version of Renaissance Italy. You could explore the countryside of Tuscany, the ancient architecture of Florence, the coast of Forli, and the canals of Venice. Leaving behind the traditionally yellow overtones of the first game, each area has its own prevailing colour, matching the dyes you can buy in each, to change the colour of the main assassin's robes. The graphics still stand up excellently to this day. While the facial animations are definitely of their time, the city streets and rooftops of Italy look incredible. Certainly, due to the nature of a large open-world adventure, there are some repeated textures here and there, but in the grand scheme of the game, the world looks brilliant. Light glances off glass window panes, and shadows of great churches cast themselves over the skyline in the midday sun. Draw distance is impressive for a game of its time, putting to shame some modern games. This draw distance is a necessity, however, with many tall places dotted through the maps that require a certain degree of visibility into the distance. Ezio's robes look impressive as well, with belts, buckles and armour pieces picked out with fine detail. Clothing texture is good, and the shift of the robes is particularly noteworthy, especially considering some of the clothing animation we saw when this game was first released, and even some games we see released now. This is a game that even to this day is visually arresting, with its own visual style that's hard to come by in an industry dominated by hyper-realistic graphics. While Assassin's Creed 2 created the combat that we saw for a great number of the following games, it wasn't perfect even upon release. It is very simple. Guards attack one at a time, some can block, and some can counter you. Your role, essentially, is to stand around and wait for an enemy to attack, so that you can counter. Some enemy attacks require disarming, and some are weaker to certain weapon types, which would usually add variety, but unfortunately, they are all the same sequence of button presses. The combat works thusly. Hold down the right trigger to block, bringing up a couple of options. You can taunt the enemy with triangle, counter with square, dodge with X, or grab the enemy with the circle button. Taunting will encourage the enemy to attack, and dodge does the obvious. You won't need to use any of the other options, however. If you press the counter button just after an enemy attacks, you outright one-shot most weaker enemies, or do damage to stronger enemies without taking any yourself. When you come up against an enemy immune to your counter, switch your weapon to bare fists and disarm them, a sequence that is the same as countering. Certainly the combat looks impressive, as Ezio is able to take on an incredible number of guards at once, but it's not the most satisfying of combat systems, ultimately becoming more of a needs to an end. Weirdly, avoiding the combat is far more entertaining. The free-running system has always been a massive part of the Assassin's Creed series, and Assassin's Creed 2 took leaps towards the best feeling climbing in a game of its time. Certainly, other games have perfected it, but it really started to get into this stride in this game. You point Ezio at a wall, hold the run trigger, and sprint up the side of a building faster than a guard can pick a stone up off the floor. The climbing is an incredibly important feature of the game, as you climb up viewpoints to get a better view of the map and fill important landmarks and objectives. Free running lets you leap over rooftops and jump from chimney to chimney. Certainly, the climbing and free running are not quite as fluid as later entries, but watching Ezio scale the Duomo in Florence is a sight to behold, particularly when coupled with the view you get at the top. There are some hitches in the climbing, however. Controlling Ezio can be a task, and you'll often find yourself watching Ezio get halfway up a wall, only to jump back down. Sometimes you'll be chasing a thief, and you'll accidentally jump off the side of a building. Not only that, but Ubisoft has filled the roofs with guards, who see you almost instantly, putting climbing sequences to a grinding halt. Small issues? Perhaps. Consistent issues? Most definitely. They don't ruin the climbing and free running, but they can certainly put a dampener on them occasionally. One of the strongest points of any Assassin's Creed game is its story, weaving a wonderful narrative about the secret assassins as they wage their silent but catastrophic war against the Order-obsessed Templars. While the premise may be somewhat generic, the execution is always excellent. The story is technically split in two. The first is the story in the modern day, where we follow Desmond Miles and his support team. This is the weaker side of the story. While Desmond is at least well voice acted, he is also somewhat boring. The same can be said of his assassin friends. They are cookie-cutter stereotypes of earnest tech nerd, sarcastic English data analyst, and stoic love interest. It's not that they're bad, they just aren't very interesting. While the world they inhabit could be one of the hidden moments of excellence, we only hear snapshots of the work that the assassins do in the modern day. Teams are lost, and the Templars appear to be winning, but while you should feel a constant tension in this terrifying game of cat and mouse against a multinational corporation, you feel fairly safe in the four walls of the hideout. The modern section of the story is the weakest link, but thankfully does not detract from the excellent story set in the past. While the modern section feels like a missed opportunity, the narrative we are taken through in the past is excellent. Ezio is a sympathetic yet humorous young man, who while he has his moments of darkness, never broods too long so as to miss making a silly comment. He is almost the James Bond of Renaissance Italy, but more sympathetic. You go on a journey with Ezio as he matures and becomes a character worth rooting for, and what a journey it is. Meet with the who's who of the period, travel the length and breadth of Italy, and avenge the death of Ezio's family, discovering a conspiracy that goes all the way to the Vatican. While a little disjointed as we do hop around timelines a little, the story set in the past is, unlike its modern counterpart, one of the strongest aspects of the game. One of the other strongest elements is arguably one of the most important aspects of the game, the assassinations themselves. This is the most free reign we've been given in an Assassin's Creed game in terms of assassinations. You're given a target, an area where the target might be, and you can kill them however you wish. Unlike other entries to the series, you don't have to meet certain parameters to complete assassination missions, and you don't even have to use the hidden blade. For this reason, they are extremely satisfying. Pull it off and you feel like you achieved something important without the game really having to hold your hand through the process like in later games. It's not just in the main story missions you'll be assassinating targets either. There are a number of side assassination missions that you can take part in as well, all with varied locations and objectives. The side quests all in all can be a slog, however. There are a lot of them, and while varied to a degree they can get a little grating. From the aforementioned assassinations, there are also letter deliveries, missions where you beat up cheating husbands, and races that see you run through courses to time limits. These missions feel ultimately pointless, only giving you extra currency, something you won't be short of anyway. Money is extremely easy to come by in-game, thanks to Monteriggioni, Ezio's home base city. Here, you gather income every 20 minutes, and you can increase this income through renovating the town and its shops, collecting paintings and building up your armament collection. This renders the extra side quests somewhat pointless. By the end of the game, you will be obscenely rich. Assassin's Creed 2 holds up to modern scrutiny very well. The story is fantastic, and the graphics surprisingly contemporary. While the combat is a little stunted and the sheer volume and repetitive nature of the side quests is unfortunate, the game is still very easy to play and enjoy in 2020, 11 years after its release in 2009.